Let me ask you a question. Do you like Lisa? Ever wanted to actually use her in a team? Well, that's what I asked myself recently, and I even challenged myself to clear the Spiral Abyss this cycle, making sure to use her on every floor. So I want to go over what I did, how I came up with the teams for her, as well as a few different options, and even character replacements. Let's go over to my basic, not quite a guide to team building to get started. So question 1 has already been answered, and it's the always lovely Lisa. Question 2 is a bit broader, since the goal is more or less just to make the team work, or more or less make Lisa playable outside of her climbing mechanics. Anyway, I would say that we have 2 options to use her in a team, and so we're going to use those as our goals to get started. So option 1 is to make Lisa's personal damage as high as possible. This would be her own attacks, skill, and burst damage. Option 2, which I personally find to be the better option from my experiments and testing, take advantage of the reactions she can do as an Electro Catalyst user. These are things like Electro Charge, Aggravate and Spread, and of course my personal favorite, Hyper Bloom. Each option requires different kinds of support to make them shine. Option 1 calls for healing, shields, and buffs. Buffs to get the most out of her damage, of course, but more importantly, Lisa is very delicate and prone to interruption. Her skill, being one of her greatest weaknesses, is very, very slow to cast, so having a shield can help mitigate that. Option 2 is very different, as it only needs the different elements to create the reactions that you want, and of course a healer generally speaking. So it ultimately ends up being a bit more straightforward to build, but gives you more options in the long run on the different paths that you can take. I only want to talk briefly on option 1, as I didn't have much success with this, mostly because I don't have the artifacts to really make this work as well as I would like. I think a team like this could work pretty well. It gives you the double pyro buff for bonus attack, a shield from Toma, and Bennett's attack buff as well as healing, and a character to lower resistances through a Nemo. This is probably the best way to get the most out of your Lisa's personal damage. I just wish I had her Constellation 6 to make using her skill just that little bit easier. Option 2 is the more interesting option as it has multiple build paths that are all very good. But before that, let me ask you another question. Did you know that Lisa gets Elemental Mastery when she ascends? You know, that stat that makes all the Dendro reactions completely ridiculous. So here are 3 teams that I came up with to take advantage of that Elemental Mastery stat to the absolute fullest. So here's team number 1. Aggravated Lisa. She's mad. Can't you tell? Using a mix of the Aggravate buff from Dendro and Electro, as well as an Anemo resistance shred, we can make our Lisa do a lot of damage. Since this boost is based on Elemental Mastery, Lisa's EM level up stat is extremely valuable. My personal Lisa is completely stacked on Elemental Mastery at the moment. This team is really solid, but honestly, it's not my favorite. So team number 2, an Electro Charge team following a similar build to the previous team, replacing the Dendro with a Hydro character that can apply Hydro off-field. I personally use Shinsho for this, but there's a few other options like Yelan or Kokomi. This team is also really solid, and has a really strong area of effect with the Electro Charges. Also, by using Beidou, you increase the chain lightning effect even more with her burst. The only real downside with this team is that you don't utilize Lisa's skill in any meaningful way, and you'll use almost entirely normal attacks. This team is good. However, it still isn't my favorite use for Lisa, because that award goes to team number 3, Hyper Bloom. I'll be blunt, Hyper Bloom is nuts. There's no 2 ways about it. Now again, this team doesn't completely utilize all of Lisa's kit, but you can still use her skill if you're feeling spicy, but generally your normal attacks, charge attack, your burst, and even your tap skill is more than enough to get the job done. With 2 Dendro characters, a Hydro character, and Lisa leading the charge, built with as much elemental mastery as humanly possible, you can achieve some absolutely insane numbers. This is the team that carried me through floor 12 of the Abyss at the recording of this video. My version of this team consists of Nahida, Shincho, Yao Yao, and of course, Lisa. So that's a lot of information being thrown at you, and a lot of options for building a powerful team for your Lisa. But there's still more to do. There's always more to do. Replacements. Some of these teams use 5-star and 4-star characters that you might not have, so I wanted to include a few options for characters you might consider if you wanted to try these teams out. I only want to mention the first option I came up with briefly, as I don't think there are that many replacements other than an alternate shielder to replace Toma. Buffs are few and far between, especially one that is as universal as Bennett. To the second option though, our 3 teams have a number of alternatives that we can talk about. For the Aggravate team, one thing to note is that any of the Dendro teams, Yao Yao is Lisa's best friend. Her and Lisa mesh together so nicely. But that aside, there are still other options. Kuki Shinobu can be a great addition to this team, or even a Dendro or Electro Traveler to fill a spot, depending on what you have. This team, there are a lot of different options such as Kokomi, Yelan, or even Barbara in a pinch. Though I personally think that the team looks a lot different if you're forced to use Barbara. You might even consider Barbara as your main DPS. A topic for another day. Finally, the Hyper Bloom team is more or less a combination of the other 2 teams, and the same sort of replacements fit. A Dendro Traveler is a good replacement for Nahida. For example, Yelan, Kokomi, or Barbara can easily fill the Dendro spot. And if you're using one of the Hydro healers, you can even replace Yao Yao with Dendro Traveler or Kale. And that covers just about everything, except the build. When you're making your team, your weapon choice, artifacts, and even talent priority might change depending on what your goal is. I'll try to cover all these pretty quickly as my focus is mostly on the team building aspect, but I'd like to do my due diligence and cover all my bases, so here we go. For a straight damage Lisa, I would use any of the crit rate, crit damage catalysts available, or even an attack catalyst like Dodoko Tails. For artifacts, I'd either use 2-piece Thundering Fury for electro damage, and 2-piece Gladiators for the attack percent bonus. Note, any attack percent works here. Another potential option with this would be just using 4-piece Thundering Fury. For the Aggravate team, I would personally use the Gilded Dreams set, and an elemental mastery weapon such as Sacrificial Fragments or the craftable Mapamare. For this build, I would also recommend a mix of elemental mastery and attack stats, potentially. You could go either way on this one. For the Taser team, I'd recommend personally the Hakushin Ring, or any EM catalyst, or even a crit rate catalyst, as this is easily the most flexible of the builds. For artifacts, you can either focus on elemental mastery for better electrocharge damage, or build more like a straight damage would. Both work well for this sort of team. Like I said, it's extremely flexible. For my personal recommendation, the Hyper Bloom team. The Paradise Lost set that buffs Hyper Bloom damage, with the highest amount of elemental mastery that you can get on them, works incredibly well. Same goes for the weapons. Just focus on elemental mastery and you'll be having a great time. Otherwise, just focus on getting as much elemental mastery as possible. There are a number of sets that their 2-piece bonus is elemental mastery, and these all work. To finally wrap things up, I'll put some of these teams to the test and see how they stack up. Most of my footage was taken from the most recent Spiral Abyss that buffs Dendro. This was on February 16th. All of them performed fairly well, with the exception of the straight damage team, as I didn't really have a build to make it work unfortunately, so you'll have to do with just footage from the elemental mastery teams. A quick disclaimer. These builds are just what I personally have come up with and thought would be good and fun to play with. These are not the only options for Lisa. These are merely what I came up with on my own and what I found to be personally comfortable and fun for my own playstyle. Please, keep experimenting. Use this as a jumping off point for your own Lisa theory crafting adventure. Now back to it. So that's it. I hope you found this helpful, and maybe even gained a new appreciation for Lisa outside of just climbing. I'm off for now. Cheers.